My name is JORICK BEIJER and welcome to World City. Super excited to host this session today on the future of living with two incredible speakers that I will introduce in a second. I think we've all seen in the recent events that the future of the spaces that we live, work and learn in have changed tremendously. Our behaviors have changed and these spaces have changed accordingly. And today we'll explore how the future of living will look like or might look like in the next couple of years and maybe also long term. My name is JORICK BEIJER. I'm the founder of Velocity. I'm an urban designer, planner by background, and I've been working for 10 years on mixed use projects all across Europe. We work on future projects that are oriented around living, working, learning, and I mean, that's only a segue in why I'm so excited about today's discussion, because I think one thing we know is that the future is hybrid. We have seen that the coronavirus, and I don't hope we'll have to use the big C too much in the discussion today, because we should think a little beyond, but has had an enormous impact on our spaces and our environments, indoors and outdoors. And I think the blend of living, working and learning environments is something that has an enormous impact on how we behave as human beings. Much focus has been recently on the future of commercial real estate. In a lot of panel discussions, we have seen investors talk, corporates talk about the future of work. Will people come back to the office? How will people come back to the office? But the office is everywhere, and the office might be in the city. And today we'll discuss how not only workspace, but how the other asset class, residential real estate, how living and architecture will look like in the future. The big question is, what is the future of living? My education in Delft, and that's just a quick frame of the discussion, has been quite informed by that idea of CM architect Jaap Bakema. We had a nice intro discussion on this right before going live. And that idea of going from chair to city. And I'm extremely excited to have the discussion today with Jana and with Raphael, representing IKEA's Space 10 think tank and Vitra, two of the giants in the field of furniture. And I think that's a tremendous starting point for our discussion. I will stop here. I would want to ask Jana if you could please give us a quick intro on what Space 10 is, and what your role is at the group.
All right, thank you, JORICK. So my name is Jana. I am editor at Space 10. Space 10 is a Copenhagen-based design and research lab, which is dedicated to and fully supported by IKEA, but we do operate as an independent company. So I am not technically an IKEA representative in this conversation, though I can tell you a few things. So we're a lab that is basically on a mission to create better and more sustainable everyday life for people and the planet. And to do that, we research technological shifts, societal shifts, and environmental shifts that are likely to influence this future of everyday life, and then we design solutions to improve it. My role is as editor of publications and of programming, so I work across with all of our teams to articulate their findings and share them with our community and more broadly. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, you have an amazing book on your table, right?
Yeah, do you want to?
Yeah, no, please. Yeah.
Just happened to be here. We have just published a book called The Ideal City with Gestalten that has just gone into second printing. So it's been a little bit of a bestseller in this category, where we have put together some of our research over the past few years about living now and living in the future.
Amazing. I'm sure we'll touch upon that later on in the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Raphael, over to you. What is a trend scout doing at Vitra?
Yeah, thank you. And first, thank you for being here. And I'm also a fan of Space 10. They are also inspire me with their broad work and their directions, what they do. So who is Vitra? Vitra is a Swiss family-owned company, and we're a design company. So our heart is really design. We believe in the power of beauty. It ends up in products, maybe in your kitchen. Maybe you sit on a Vitra sofa, you work on a Vitra table, or when you're in one of the largest airports in the world, you wait on the Vitra bench. And we believe the design and also the power of beauty makes spaces really livable. And my job, I'm the trend scout for the future of work, life, and learn. And my major spot is the question how we will work in 5 or 10 years from now. Not out of the perspective in which kind of architecture, in a general layer, like first is a cultural layer, second is society layer, third a technology, and fourth the economy layer. For that reason, before COVID, I traveled around the world. I was in more than 35 countries on 5 continents, every time with the question out of my mind, and to try to understand that and bring that together. I name it in a panorama. So I provide for Vitra, for our friends, partners, I name it a weather map. Maybe if you are a good pilot, what you need to come to the best destinations, and if the future is a destination, you need a kind of a weather map to design your alternative future, or maybe your preferred future. That's my job.
Awesome. Well, let's explore that weather map together today. Speaking of travel, I think the three of us, and many of the listeners and people viewing this discussion will all have been frequent flyers until that lockdown sort of hit us quite hard 1.5 years ago. I wanted to sort of zoom in a bit more on the micro scale of the home. We all got locked up in a way, some more than others in our homes. I just wanted to check in with you, Jana. Did you see, not so much maybe for yourself, but maybe a little bit wider, what kind of new behaviors did you see, and what kind of new ways of using our residential space did you see popping up in the last year?
Wow, that's a really big question. Well, our office, we are very connected to our office at Space 10. It's an iconic building that we're very proud of and has been designed very carefully. And suddenly we had to abandon this building and all work from home, which actually led us on a very interesting design journey, because we became quite thoughtful about how we were going to work remotely and how we can best maybe improve our remote work practices, our remote meeting etiquette, the way that we're operating as a company, which then led us to really research how we were working individually from home. So there was a certain point at which we started thinking, how do we connect these two realms, and what does this mean for the future? And our spatial design lead asked everyone to send photos of their home work setup to see how we had individually set it up. And that led to this huge personalization of the office. And then we went back, and then about a month later, we had to go back to work from home. So yeah. That was quite funny, and that led to, again, maybe more nuanced thinking about, okay, what does each individual person need to work from home? It became a conversation about how to set up these home offices with company support, rather than create some sort of office that we can come to. And I would say that one thing that we have come out as a group of people that are just much more aware that people actually live quite differently and have different families and have different needs and caring duties, and different things make us happy, and we work well differently than before this great shift to work from home. I think we have all gotten to know ourselves better and each other.
Wow, yeah, I love that. Thank you. Yeah, that's a nice starting point. Raphael, building on that, how did you experience? I mean, I know that you live in a farm in Bavaria, but how was that for yourself, and what kind of things did you see maybe a little bit more beyond your personal realm when it comes to changes to your home in the light of working from home?
Okay, so just to give you an idea, my private life before was, I would say, 80% pandemic safe, because I live in the outback. We have less connection with people because we have big shelter dogs. So people, they are not really happy to visit us for that reason. Then I always have a lot of work. So I would say my life before COVID at home, it was full and occupied and vivid with all the things you need. But and I work remote since, I would say, 12 or 13 years. So in the years before the pandemic, I was at vitra, I would say 30, maybe up to 40 days a year, not so often. And I learn how to be connected to how to be part of the pack, how to create a sense of belonging to my team and to the entire company, and even how to be present if you are not on site. That makes a difference. If you're not on the same boat like the rest. So I was trained. But then I was overwhelmed with all these signals. As a trend scout, you read everyday signals. And then for me start, like, I would say, the biggest survey in my life. So every news, every article, whatever happens was dedicated to this big change, to the lockdown. And it was like, I didn't know where to stop. So I have to protect myself to say, stop here. So, but immediately what I want to understand was not so, okay, how we survive the pandemic, because that was quite clear. We will do that. However, one person better, the other, so like maybe these in the countryside with a garden, with kids a little better than instead the people in the city. And I had frequent conversation with my colleagues in Asia, in the States, or in other parts of Europe. My question was, how big will be the change after? So what is the change? What is really the change in behavior patterns? How we use our homes, the office, the city? And second, when it will start. I was totally wrong in what it will be, because I believe after 6 months, the old world is back. So I was totally wrong in the beginning. And then I tried to understand, I would say, piece by piece, by building a puzzle with tons of conversations with the people outside in the other countries, try to understand how they deal with that and what they believe, what are they missing, or what are they looking for, or what they never believe in. Because one part of the truth is, most of the companies were still running. If you would mention that before, And so for me, it was a big experiment, and thanks God, I would say 80% of the experiment now is over, and I'm looking forward into a new area. Like it's the dawn of a new area, I really believe.
Interesting. Yeah, go, Jana. Yeah.
Can I add something? I think personally that we often overestimate the impact of a single event, and we underestimate the importance of slow creeping change. You know, we expect single events like revolution, like the Occupy movement, to change everything in a kind of irreversible way, and we fail to see, for example, the huge transformational role of the smartphone, you know, or Instagram. Something that actually really gradually changes our life. And unlike Raphael, our worry was the opposite. It was that the world would not come back to where it was, because at Space 10, we really look at this sort of slow creeping change and like to believe that humans do have kind of fundamental needs that we are working to kind of solve or enable, you know, or design for. And just before the pandemic, we had just finished this amazing report on food trends by looking at China. So we were looking at dark kitchens, we were looking at fresh food, we were looking at new ingredients, and also huge rise in delivery, home delivery. And so we were sitting on this report, which was very kind of insensitive to really release during the pandemic or to sort of really talk about. But we were sort of thinking all of these trends are only going to be exacerbated by the pandemic. There will be more home delivery. There will be more sort of food coming from who knows where. And I'm actually really glad to see that a lot of what we were expecting to happen has actually happened, which is to say the world is really going the same way that it was before, just a bit faster, or we've skipped a few steps.
Yeah,
I want to jump in also. I want to jump because you know what happens all over the world, even with our editor here in Vancouver. Look at the harbors where hundreds of ships are waiting. And I would love that most of the managers, Jana, read your books, because then they understand what to do and what not to do, because we are like in our personal behavior, like in tweets, in Tindering, in Twittering, in Instagramming, because we are like quick. Yeah, I talk. And what is really missing is like, hey, we have to look beyond the gloss.
I think a lot of these discussions, I mean, of course, it's funny that you see that sort of that zooming out and that moment of sort of reflection, but that only always has sort of a limited momentum for certain people in the room. I think what I like about what you were sort of sketching, Jana, is that I think in a lot of ways what I've seen is that it's also an acceleration of change that was already happening. And so you see certain notions, for example, the whole notion around well-being, mental well-being. I mean, that got hugely accelerated in COVID. Sport, for example, as well. A lot of things that we saw happening just got pushed forward quickly. I think we also that piece on inequality. I think that's also something that also I find really interesting. It has been a very different crisis, and if you think about work and home, it's very different if you're locked up in your countryside, West London kind of house, or you're in Hong Kong and you're 21 years old and you live in a small apartment. And so I think also that sensitivity to how unequal workspace, but also cities are, and how we have many different design challenges, I think is something that for me, I think really got exposed over the crisis. And I think it's one of the things I wanted to bring on, sort of tapping into that. I think we've all seen that trend of more communal living, more shared living. I've been doing research with the Class of 2020 think tank on university cities and student accommodation. I think we all saw that trend of more dense city living. And then of course, I mean, that was all stopped like quite radically. Who wants to live together in a small flat with someone that you don't know? And I think it's also that, I mean, we're sort of adjusting and accommodating new behaviors in that new era that Raphael was sketching. I'm just curious, what kind of future? And then you had that other story of people anecdotally escaping the city to live in the countryside, but maybe then also thinking of coming back after 6 months because, I mean, you're getting bored out if you live on the outskirts of the Netherlands or Germany or wherever. I'm just curious, what do you see, both of you, when it comes to that kind of new urban living typologies? Where do we live in 5 years? Will that change or not so much?
Okay, there are two things. If you think about residential, in all of let us take Europe. So the residential market is driven by two forces. One force is dry powder. That is the money for investment companies to invest in residential. Second is I would say in an old way thinking, kind of architecture, how they build city quarters or city districts. To bring this change into the city out of a new perspective, even by the government or by the majors, I think it needs 7 up to 8 years to change the regulation, come up with new architecture competition, and getting new references, because the limitation of us is our creativity. So that needs maybe for sure 7 or 8 years. But what we will see quite soon, I would say, maybe not tomorrow, we get new protagonists who do something different, who say, okay, the status quo is not an option because it brings us where we ended now. For that reason, they try now to make something special, maybe with their own money on their own property and with people who believe in. And I believe that we will see in all major countries, even all over the world. And the pressure is coming now by the citizen, because the citizen get his voice much more than before. Talking about architecture and our cities in the past was intellectual, exclusive. And now it's not intellectual anymore, and it's inclusive. And I hope that brings a change.
I'm very happy that you have said all of this, Raphael. I can only agree. I also think I'm curious actually to hear, JORICK, what you will have to say because of your background in health. And there are so many thoughts that I'm sort of trying to gather. I would say that on the one hand, we have seen these huge changes happen in a very short period of time recently that seem to have reversed some of the trends that have been going on for a long time of people moving to cities, living in ever smaller spaces, moving and then being pushed sort of toward the edge of the city in kind of quite inadequate, often accommodation because we have these huge affordability issues. We've seen certainly a huge increase in people moving to the countryside, like in Australia, where I'm from, the real estate prices have absolutely exploded in, say, coastal communities, with the average house price in Australia overall rising by 100,000 in a year. So that's 2,000 a week. This is just terrible if you're trying to save up for a home loan. And that's largely been driven by city prices staying the same, but rural house prices increasing by a lot. Yeah. But again, if we zoom out a little bit, I'm not sure that this is not going to be sort of reversed, or that we're not going to see the continuation of the trends that we have now. One thing that I think has been really good is that we have, by necessity, have to think a lot more about the quality of the spaces we live in. You know, the real need to actually have sound insulation if you have two working adults, the need to sort of have space for your child. Also, you know, one of my great kind of gripes is that very often interior designers these days design in 2D, they design for Instagram. And I've seen that, you know, like people are now decorating not for Instagram, but for actually having a comfortable home. So I think the pandemic has actually made us all a lot more aware that we have genuine physical health and mental health and so on needs that our homes really should be fulfilling. And I really hope that we come out of all of this wiser.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much. Can't agree more. I think it has been fascinating to see how much we learned. I mean, and I hope we all learned from this crisis. And I think we've been working ourselves with the firm on built environments and behavior for a while. And health is such a critical component. And I think it's too simple to say that we now all want one more bedroom or we want to study because that's so pleasant. I think we need better design, and we need more flexible design. And it's in ventilation, it's in, to your point, in sound isolation. So I think we need much more dedication to how we design interiors and architecture at large. And I love, I mean, it's actually funny. One of the things I wanted to discuss with you is that idea of beauty as well. And I think we're, first of all, we're social species. So that's why I think that idea of and sharing will never disappear. I think we are meant to be together. So it has to be safe, but I don't think the housing crisis allows for it, but I also think that we want to be connected to people. But I think we also want to be in beautiful spaces, and we want to touch materials, and we're sensory. So I would love to pick on that and that power of beauty. How important, what can we do to make our homes better and more pleasant for the next couple of years, Raphael?
Okay, I would say that is easy. By
Vitra.
No, not by Vitra. No. You said that. No, I would say in general that is easy. You know why? As in that during these lockdowns, where people, I think the longest lockdown was in Melbourne with 286 days, something like that. So think about when people stay wherever on the planet so long at home. First, they know these are your kids. This is your wife. This is your husband. Oh my God. And then they come with, and this is your space where you go in every day just for sleep. And then they start to say, I need an upgrade. Well-educated, bad educated, inspired, not inspired. And then they start to make their own experiment. And maybe Instagram was like the Instagramization of space was maybe the manual, the biggest tutorial for the people to say, I have to change something. And if you ask the dealers, the furniture dealers, or all these home decor companies, then most of them were sold out. They have no idea how to bring the goods quite before the crisis with Suez and all the other things. So they were sold out. So I would say this is easy, but I think the challenge is, there is another challenge. The planet is sold out. property on planet is sold out. And even in the countryside, maybe in the super northeast of Siberia, it's not sold out. But I would say in general, it is sold out. And we have to deal, I think that is quite critical, how we make space affordable, even for a normal income person in a city, a vivid space where you say, that is a great space to stay in the terms of this sold out movement. And that, I think that is struggling. And back to your question about how to make it, how to make your home as your home. It's also a renaissance for interior designers and architects. So these books are full, and it's not a question about money to rent someone. Even if you could not afford a person, what you would do is you would buy now these magazines or go to the internet, go to the platforms, maybe find your personal influencer, and then you get inspired, and then you start to say, okay, that is my project, I make it happen.
I love the way that you say, you know, like when you're at home for 200 days, that lamp that needs to go, it just really needs to go. I think that has actually been a really strong motivator for a lot of the renovations. Also, I think the questions that you raise are so interesting because yes, you know, we can talk about whether work from home will change the floor plans, but it is actually a bigger conversation here that we need to have. We are looking at new lifestyles, new family structures. You know, we're still building by and large for nuclear families with 2 kids, but that's not actually how people live these days. And I think to some extent we were already not living like this before the pandemic, but it was possible to hide it. And once we started working from home, you know, where you have your children climbing over you in a work Zoom call, when you are actually struggling because you do have to have housemates because you can't afford your rent or your mortgage, maybe this pandemic has been a huge kind of call to realism about really thinking about what we actually need as individuals and as communities, you know. So micro apartments, very small spaces, we know make people miserable, but when they're paired with shared facilities, then they can be very good spaces. I know that Nightingale apartments in Melbourne were really good places to live during the lockdown because they have such a strong sense of community that enormously long period of isolation was much more maybe joyous. People felt a lot more connected. But what we were doing before the pandemic was a kind of commercial churning out of these micro spaces and of co-living without really without doing proper research about how to do them really well. At Space 10, we did a beautiful research on what people would like to share in shared living. And it's actually quite nuanced. You know, most people would rather do extra cleaning than have to have dinners every night with their community. I mean, that's a complex answer to the question of like, what would you be prepared to share? Most people would not want to share the bathroom or groceries, but they'd be very happy to garden together and have that kind of spaces. So maybe we should take those questions seriously and really try to design small housing that actually that actually fulfills our needs for connection without compromising on our need, for example, for privacy or quiet times.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much. And just wondering, I mean, my work on student accommodation had a lot of these things integrated into it. But I'm also equally fascinated with these kind of shared concepts for elder generations. Was there any intergenerational research done in your project?
In one shared house, we actually found out that elderly people have a very strong preference for sharing, particularly when they don't have family. And for them, privacy was much less of a concern than for younger people. So they were not particularly worried about not having enough personal space. What they didn't want to have to deal was other people's strife, so conflict and mess. They were quite particular about that.
I want to add, because it's perfect match. We had at the Vitra Design Museum 2 years ago, the exhibition called Together was about together living. So I think there is not a problem that we don't have any ideas or any, I would say, beta versions or prototypes of how we could do that. And doesn't matter, big cities, smaller cities, multi-generation, blah, blah, blah. I think what is missing is how we are conditioned in Europe. Like half of my family is from Spain. So my Spanish family, they own their own property. Even my young cousins go now to buy their own property because it's normal. I think the average 70% of the space of private housing in Spain is owned by someone. If you would go to Switzerland, they never own it because they only pay the taxes. So yeah, it's another model. So they are the owner on the paper, but even not on the bank side. In Spain, you try to make it happen until you are 60 or maybe 55. So, and this setup, which is coded over generations, also in Germany, that is the hurt to change this decision. You talked before about the elder generations, and that for Europe, for the old world, that is also a challenge to implement these older generations in kind of vivid ecosystems of housing, where also the other one take care about them. We could not address that to, I would say, these kind of hospitals. That makes totally not sense because families are not living together anymore, and you need a consent. You need a compensation for that. Compensation, sorry, for that, or a new model. Yeah, and here we have to design. So the job of a designer is not only to design a space; it's much more to understand what are, in a zoom out, what are future, what are signals which are like out of a demographic perspective, real cases in 5 or 10 years from now, and how we should change.
Yeah, and I think that also calls for a huge cultural sensitivity. I think we all know, but it's important to maybe just say it one more time that for example, the housing market is so different from country to country in Europe. Cultures, living culture is so different in between generations. So we need to be super sensitive and not generalize conclusions because you can't compare housing in Germany with Spain. I think that's a fair point. Do you want to? I see you thinking, Jana. Do you want to comment?
Oh, there's just so many. We could have this conversation for hours.
Yeah, and we need to wrap it up almost. Yeah.
I would say that one of the things that we found was that people want to have housing security. They don't. If that housing security can be offered in another way, so that they don't have to own the house, then they are very happy, as long as they know that they can stay as long as they want, that their rent is not going to increase by 100% overnight. People were often quite interested in having like a shared ownership model, like what you have in Switzerland, where you become the owner of a part of a community or a cooperative, because that was also seen as a kind of security. So yes, as long as that security is there are many, many, many ways culturally appropriate to create it.
I think that's a great way to wrap it up for today. I mean, time flew by. I think we could have had the chat for 1.5 hours easily. I think it'd be a great idea to have this conversation in one year time at the next World City event, and just maybe reflect a little bit on the things we saw and we will see then in the next 12 months. Thanks so much for your time, guys. It's been fascinating discussion. We went from, I scribbled down some notes, from Renaissance to realism to the intergamification of space to new lifestyles, power of beauty. I think we touched upon so many things, and I think the answer is probably that there are many different futures when it comes to living, and let's stay curious. Thanks so much for your time. I wish everyone viewing the panel a great World City event, and thanks so much for tuning in.